The rain hadn't stopped in 3 days. It drummed against the roof of the old Victorian house, a relentless patter that seemed to seep into the walls, making the air heavy and the silence heavier. Ellen Harper stood at the kitchen window, her reflection ghostly in the glass, her hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea that had gone cold. The suburban street outside was a blur of gray, sodden leaves plastered to the pavement, mailboxes glistening under the streetlights. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her, just beyond the veil of rain. Ellen was 49, her auburn hair streaked with silver, her eyes carrying the weight of years spent loving fiercely and worrying endlessly. She glanced at the clock on the wall, 7:32 p.m. Her daughter Lila was upstairs, probably scrolling on her phone or sketching in that worn leather journal she carried everywhere. At 20, Lila was a quiet storm of contradictions, fiercely independent yet tethered to the house, her adoptive home since she was 2. Ellen's heart ached with love for her, but also with something else, a nagging unease she could never name. The adoption had been a miracle. In 2001, Ellen and her husband David had been drowning in the grief of 2 miscarriages when the agency called. A toddler, abandoned at a fire station, no family to claim her. They'd named her Lila, after David's mother, and poured every ounce of their love into her. But there were gaps, questions about her origins that the agency couldn't answer, details that seemed to dissolve into the ether. Ellen had always wondered about the birth mother, a shadow figure who existed only in the margins of their story. Until today. The letter had arrived that morning, slipped into the mailbox without a sound. No return address, just Ellen's name scrawled in spidery ink. She hadn't opened it yet. It sat on the kitchen counter, a cream-colored envelope with a faint coffee stain, as if it had traveled through time itself. Ellen's fingers twitched, wanting to tear it open, but fear held her back. What could it say after 20 years? What could it change? Lila, she called, her voice softer than she intended. No answer. The house creaked, as it always did, its bones settling under the weight of the storm. Ellen set her mug down and picked up the envelope, her thumb brushing the jagged edge where it had been sealed. Her pulse quickened. She was about to slit it open when the floorboards groaned behind her. Mom. Lila's voice was low, almost lost in the rain's rhythm. Ellen turned to see her daughter in the doorway, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, her green eyes sharp with something unreadable. She wore an oversized sweater, the sleeves frayed, and held her journal like a shield. You okay? Ellen asked, tucking the envelope behind her back. Guilt pricked at her. She hadn't told Lila about the letter yet. She wasn't sure why. Lila shrugged, her gaze flickering to the counter. Just restless. This rain's driving me nuts. She crossed to the fridge, pulling out a carton of orange juice. You've been staring out that window for like an hour. What's up? Ellen forced a smile. Just thinking. You know how I get when it's gloomy. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. Lila didn't press, but her eyes lingered on Ellen, searching. She had always been perceptive, too much so, catching the undercurrents of emotions Ellen tried to hide. As Lila poured her juice, Ellen's mind drifted to the house quirks, the cold spots in the hallway, the way the attic door sometimes unlatched itself. They'd bought the place a year before adopting Lila, charmed by its wraparound porch and stained glass windows. But it had a history, whispers of tragedy no one could quite pin down. Neighbors spoke of a fire in the 70s, a family that vanished. Ellen had dismissed it as small-town gossip, but lately she'd felt something. A presence, maybe, or just her imagination running wild. Mom, you're doing it again, Lila said, snapping Ellen out of her thoughts. She was leaning against the counter now, her journal open to a page filled with intricate sketches, swirling patterns, eyes within eyes. Symbols Ellen didn't recognize. You're zoning out. Sorry, sweetheart. Ellen hesitated, then set the envelope down, face up. Lila's eyes flicked to it, and for a moment, the air felt charged, like the moment before lightning. This came today, Ellen said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's about you. Lila froze, the juice carton halfway to her lips. May? Her tone was guarded, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of curiosity, maybe fear. "What do you mean about me?" Ellen swallowed. "It's from your birth, Mother." The words hung there, heavy as the rain. Lila set the carton down, her movements slow, deliberate. "My birth mother?" Her voice cracked, just slightly. "After all this time, why now?" "I don't know," Ellen admitted. "I haven't opened it yet." Lila stared at the envelope, her fingers tightening around her journal. Ellen wanted to reach for her, to pull her into a hug like when she was small. But Lila had grown sharp edges over the years, a quiet intensity that kept people at arm's length. "Do you want to read it?" Ellen asked. Lila didn't answer right away. She crossed her arms, her gaze fixed on the envelope as if it might bite. "I don't know," she said finally. "I mean, what could she possibly say? She left me. She didn't want me." Ellen's heart twisted. "We don't know that, Lila. We don't know her story." Lila's eyes flashed, a spark of anger. Her story. She had 20 years to tell it. Why now? What's changed? She turned away, her shoulders tense, and Ellen felt the distance between them widen, a chasm she couldn't bridge. Before Ellen could respond, a low hum filled the room. Not the rain, not the house settling, but something deeper, almost primal. The lights flickered just for a second and the air grew thick like it was holding its breath. Lila whipped around, her eyes wide. "Did you feel that?" Ellen nodded, her skin prickling. The envelope seemed to pulse on the counter, though she knew it was impossible. "It's just the storm," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. The hum faded, leaving only the rain's steady drum. Lila's gaze darted to the ceiling, as if she could see through it to the attic, to whatever secrets the house held. "Let's read it," Lila said suddenly, her voice firm. "Together." Ellen's hand trembled as she reached for the envelope. She tore it open, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet kitchen. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once, the ink smudged in places as if it had been written in haste. She unfolded it, her breath catching as she read the first line aloud. "To the family who raised my daughter." The words were a spark, igniting something Ellen couldn't name. Lila leaned closer, her breath warm against Ellen's arm. The letter was short, the handwriting jagged, almost frantic. It spoke of regret, of choices made in desperation, of a truth too dangerous to share until now. But it was the last line that stopped Ellen's heart, that made Lila gasp and step back. "She's not what you think she is." The lights flickered again, longer this time, and the hum returned, louder, vibrating in Ellen's bones. Lila's journal slipped from her hands, hitting the floor with a thud, its pages splayed open to a sketch of a figure cloaked in shadow, eyes glowing like embers. Outside, the rain roared, and someone, tapped against the window, soft but deliberate, as if waiting to be let in. Lila's breath caught in her throat, her eyes locked on the window where the tapping had sounded. The glass was streaked with rain, distorting the world outside into a kaleidoscope of shadows. She took a step back, her bare foot brushing against the journal on the floor. The sketch stared up at her. Those burning eyes, that cloaked figure she'd drawn weeks ago in a half-remembered dream. Her heart pounded, not just from the letter's cryptic words, but from the way the air seemed to press against her, thick with unspoken warnings. "Mom," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Did you hear that?" Ellen nodded, her face pale, the letter trembling in her hands. "It's just branches," she said, but her eyes darted to the window, betraying her doubt. The tapping had been too rhythmic, too intentional, to be dismissed as nature's whim. She folded the letter and tucked it back into the envelope, as if hiding it could undo its weight. "Lila, maybe we should, No." Lila's voice was sharp, cutting through the hum that still lingered in the room. She bent to pick up her journal, her fingers brushing the sketch. A chill ran through her, unbidden, as if the paper itself held a charge. "We need to know what it means. She's not what you think she is. What the hell is that supposed to mean?" Ellen flinched at the edge in Lila's tone, but she didn't argue. She knew her daughter's fire, the way it flared when she felt cornered. I don't know, sweetheart, but we'll figure it out. Together. Lila wanted to believe her, but the words felt hollow. She'd spent her life piecing together who she was. Adopted, loved, but always with a piece missing. The letter was a jagged shard of that puzzle, and it didn't fit. She clutched her journal tighter, her mind racing. The sketches had started months ago, unprompted, spilling onto the pages late at night when sleep wouldn't come. Faces she didn't recognize, symbols that felt familiar yet alien. She hadn't shown them to Ellen, hadn't wanted to explain what she didn't understand herself. The lights flickered again, plunging the kitchen into a heartbeat of darkness before they steadied. Ellen crossed to the window, peering out, her breath fogging the glass. There's nothing out there, she said, but her voice wavered. She turned back to Lila, her eyes searching. Maybe we should call your dad. He's still at the office. Lila shook her head. He'll just say it's nothing. Like always. David was practical, a man who saw the world in straight lines and clear answers. He dismissed the letter as a prank, the tapping as the storm. But Lila felt it. Something was unraveling, something bigger than a letter or a sound. She opened her journal again, flipping past the sketch of the cloaked figure to another page, one she hadn't shown anyone. It was a drawing of the house, but not as it was now. The windows were boarded, the porch sagging, and a faint glow emanated from the attic. She'd drawn it after a nightmare, the details so vivid she'd woken up shaking. Now, standing in the kitchen, she wondered if it was more than a dream. Mom, she said, her voice softer now, almost pleading. Have you ever felt something in this house? Like it's watching? Ellen's face tightened, and for a moment Lila thought she'd brush it off. But then Ellen sighed, her shoulders slumping. Sometimes, she admitted. The attic especially. I've never liked going up there. It's silly, I know, but it's not silly, Lila interrupted. She stepped closer, her journal open to the attic sketch. Look at this. Ellen's eyes widened as she took in the drawing. The glow, the warped lines of the house. It was their home, but wrong, like a memory twisted by time. When did you draw this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. A month ago, Lila said. I didn't think anything of it then. Just a bad dream. But now. She trailed off, her gaze flicking to the envelope on the counter. The letter's words echoed in her mind. She's not what you think she is. A shiver ran through her, not from the cold, but from a deeper, primal unease. Ellen reached for the letter again, her fingers hesitating before pulling out the paper. There's more here, she said, scanning the lines she hadn't read aloud. Her face paled further, and she handed the letter to Lila. Read it. Lila took the paper, her hand steady despite the storm in her chest. The handwriting was erratic, the words spilling over each other. To the family who raised my daughter. I don't expect forgiveness. I left her because I had no choice. There are things you don't know, things I couldn't tell you then. She's not what you think she is. There's a mark on her, a truth tied to this place. If you're in the house on Willow Street, you've felt it. The walls remember. The attic knows. Be careful. She'll need you when it starts. The letter ended abruptly. No signature, no name. Lila's throat tightened. Willow Street. Their street. The attic. Her sketches. It was too much, too precise to be coincidence. She looked at Ellen, who was staring at the ceiling as if she could see through the floors to the attic above. What does she mean when it starts? Lila asked, her voice shaking now. And what's this about a mark? Ellen didn't answer right away. She crossed to the sink, gripping the edge as if to steady herself. I don't know, she said finally. But there's something I never told you. Lila's heart skipped. What? When we adopted you, Ellen said, her voice barely audible, there was a mark on your shoulder. A birthmark, we thought. Shaped like a crescent moon. The agency said it was nothing, just a quirk. But, she trailed off, her eyes distant. Lila's hand went to her shoulder, where she knew the mark was, a faint crescent she'd always thought was normal. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't think it mattered," Ellen said, her voice breaking. "I thought it was just a mark." Before Lila could respond, the hum returned, louder now, vibrating through the floor. The lights flickered, then went out completely, plunging the kitchen into darkness. Somewhere upstairs, a door creaked open, slow and deliberate. Lila's pulse roared in her ears. The letter slipped from her fingers, fluttering to the floor like a warning. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling. That was the attic. The darkness in the kitchen was absolute, the kind that pressed against Lila's eyes like a physical weight. The hum had stopped, but the silence that followed was worse. Thick, expectant, as if the house itself were holding its breath. The creak of the attic door echoed in her mind, a sound too deliberate to be the wind or the storm. She reached for Ellen's arm, her fingers brushing her mother's sleeve in the dark. "Mom, we need to check it," Lila said, her voice low but firm. Fear coiled in her stomach, but so did something else. Curiosity, sharp and insistent, like a hook pulling her toward the unknown. Ellen's silhouette shifted, barely visible in the faint glow from the streetlights filtering through the rain-streaked windows. "Lila, we don't know what's up there. It could just be—" "It's not the storm," Lila cut in, her tone sharper than she meant. She softened it, adding, "You heard it, the door, and the letter. It mentioned the attic." She didn't say the rest, how her sketches, her dreams, all seemed to point to that forbidden space above them. Crescent mark on her shoulder tingled, as if it knew something she didn't. Ellen hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, but we stay together." She fumbled in a drawer, pulling out a flashlight. Its beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the kitchen in stark relief. The letter on the floor, Lila's journal splayed open to the attic sketch, the counter where the envelope still sat like an accusation. Ellen picked up the letter, tucking it into her pocket, and handed Lila the flashlight. "You lead." Lila's hand shook as she took it, but she didn't argue. She moved toward the hallway, the beams sweeping over faded wallpaper, and the staircase that curved upward into shadow. The house felt alive, its creaks and groans sensing with her heartbeat. Ellen followed close behind, her breath uneven, her hand brushing Lila's back as if to anchor them both. The stairs creaked under their weight, each step louder than the last. Lila's mind flashed to the letter's words. The walls remember. The attic knows. What did it know? And why did it feel like she was walking towards something she'd always known, deep down, but had buried? At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched dark and narrow. The attic door at the far end cracked open, just enough to reveal a sliver of deeper black. Lila paused, the flashlight beam trembling on the door. "It's never been opened before," she whispered. Ellen had always kept it locked, claiming it was unsafe, full of old junk from previous owners. But now, the lock hung loose, the latch glinting in the light. Ellen's voice was tight. "Maybe your dad left it open. He was up there last week, looking for boxes." But the doubt in her tone was palpable. David was meticulous, not the type to leave doors ajar. Lila pushed forward, her journal tucked under her arm, the flashlight steadying as she focused. The air grew colder as they approached, a draft seeping from the attic like a sigh. She reached for the door, her fingers brushing the worn wood, and pushed it open. The hinges groaned, a sound that echoed in her bones. The attic was a cavern of shadows, the flashlight beam catching dust motes that danced like tiny spirits. Wooden beams crisscrossed the ceiling, and boxes were stacked haphazardly, their edges softened by cobwebs. A single window, small and round, let in a sickly gray light from the storm outside. Lila's breath caught as the beam swept over something in the corner. A mirror, its surface clouded with age, propped against the wall. Her reflection stared back, distorted, her eyes too large, her crescent mark faintly visible through her sweater. "Lila," Ellen whispered, her voice urgent. She was staring at the floor where faint scratches formed a pattern, a crescent like Lila's birthmark etched into the wood. What is that? Lila knelt, her fingers tracing the lines. They were old, worn smooth by time, but deliberate. Her journal slipped from her arm, falling open to the sketch of the house, the attic glowing. She froze. The crescent in her drawing matched the one on the floor, down to the curve of its edges. "This was in my dream," she said, her voice barely audible. "This exact mark." Ellen's face paled, her hand clutching the letter in her pocket. "We need to leave," she said, but her words lacked conviction, as if the attic had its own gravity, pulling them deeper. Before Lila could respond, the mirror flickered, not the light, but something within it. A shadow moved, too quick to catch, and the hum returned, low and pulsing, vibrating through the floorboards. Lila's heart raced, but she couldn't look away. The mirror seemed to call her, its surface rippling like water. She stepped closer, the flashlight beam trembling, and saw it. A figure, cloaked, its eyes glowing like embers, just like her sketch. "Lila." Ellen grabbed her arm, yanking her back. The flashlight fell, its beam spinning wildly before it went out, plunging them into darkness. The hum grew louder, a chorus of whispers now, words Lila couldn't make out but felt in her chest. The air turned heavy, pressing against her skin, and the crescent mark on her shoulder burned, sharp and sudden. "Mom, it's here," Lila gasped, her voice breaking. "Something's here." The attic door slammed shut behind them, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Ellen fumbled for the knob, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers grew clearer, a single phrase repeating, "She's not what you think." Lila's vision blurred, her knees buckling as a memory. Or was it a vision? Flashed through her mind, a woman's face, tear-streaked, holding a toddler in a room that smelled of smoke. The crescent mark glowed on the child's shoulder, and the woman whispered, "I'm sorry." The lights flickered back on, dim and unsteady, and the attic was silent again. But the mirror was empty now, and the crescent on the floor seemed to pulse, as if it had a heartbeat of its own. Ellen's hands shook as she gripped the attic doorknob, twisting it with a desperation that bordered on panic. The door wouldn't budge, as if sealed by something stronger than a lock. Her breath came in shallow gasps, the air in the attic thick with dust and something else. Something acrid, like the memory of a fire long extinguished. Lila stood frozen behind her, her eyes wide, staring at the crescent etched into the floor. The flashlight lay useless at their feet, its beam extinguished, but the dim glow from the attic window was enough to cast their shadows long and wavering against the walls. "Layla, help me," Ellen said, her voice sharp with urgency. She pounded on the door, the sound dull and muffled, as if the house itself were swallowing it. Her mind raced, replaying the letter's words. The walls remember. The attic knows. She dismissed the house's quirks for years. Creaks, cold spots, the way the lights flickered during storms. But now, trapped in this attic with its crescent mark and whispering shadows, she couldn't deny it. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. Lila snapped out of her trance, joining Ellen at the door. Her hands were steadier, but her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. "It's not going to open," she said, her voice eerily calm. "Not until it wants to." Ellen turned, her heart lurching. "What does that mean? Until what wants to?" Lila didn't answer. She stepped back, her gaze drawn to the mirror again. The surface was still now, no shadows, no glowing eyes, but Ellen saw the way Lila's fingers brushed the crescent mark on her shoulder, as if it were a wound. That mark, Ellen had always thought it was harmless, a quirk of birth. Now it felt like a key to something she wasn't ready to understand. "Layla, talk to me," Ellen pleaded, her voice softening. "What did you see? Just now, when you froze?" Lila's eyes met hers, haunted, distant. "A woman," she said finally, "holding me. There was smoke and she was crying. She said she was sorry." Her voice cracked, and she hugged her journal to her chest, as if it could protect her from the memory. "It felt real, Mom, like it happened." Ellen's throat tightened. She wanted to say it was just a vision, a trick of the attic's oppressive air, but the letter burned in her pocket, its words too precise to dismiss. She's not what you think she is. She reached for Lila, pulling her into a hug. But Lila stiffened, her body rigid with fear or defiance or both. "We need to get out of here," Ellen said, her voice firm now. She turned back to the door, banging on it again, her knuckles aching. "David, anyone!" But the house was silent, the storm outside muffled, as if they were cut off from the world. Lila stepped away, moving toward the mirror. "Wait," she said, her voice low. "There's something here." She knelt, running her fingers along the floor near the mirror, where the crescent mark seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. "Look at this." Ellen crouched beside her, her heart pounding. The floorboards were loose, a faint seam visible where they met the crescent. Lila pried at them with her nails, and to Ellen's surprise, one lifted, revealing a small, dusty compartment beneath. Inside was a bundle of papers, yellowed with age, tied with a frayed ribbon. Lila's hands trembled as she lifted it out, her journal forgotten on the floor. "What is this?" Ellen whispered, her voice barely audible. The papers smelled of smoke, the edges brittle, as if they'd been salvaged from a fire. Lila untied the ribbon, revealing a stack of letters, newspaper clippings, and a single photograph. The photo showed a young woman, her face strikingly similar to Lila's. Same sharp cheekbones, same green eyes. She held a toddler, a crescent mark visible on the child's shoulder. "Oh my God," Ellen breathed, her hand covering her mouth. "Is that?" "My birth mother," Lila finished, her voice hollow. She flipped through the letters, her eyes scanning the faded ink. They were written in the same spidery handwriting as the one downstairs, addressed to someone named Clara. The words were fragmented, frantic. "They're coming for us. The mark binds her. The house won't let go." Ellen's stomach churned. "Clara," she murmured. The name felt familiar, like a half-forgotten dream. She reached for a newspaper clipping, its headline stark: "Family vanishes after Willow Street fire, 1978. The article mentioned a woman named Clara Evans, her husband, and their young daughter, lost after a blaze that gutted their home. Their home, this house. Lila's hands froze on a letter. "Mom, listen to this," she said, her voice shaking. She read aloud. "The mark is a beacon. It calls them. If she stays in the house, they'll find her. I tried to save her, but I failed. I'm sorry, Clara." The air grew colder, the hum returning, louder now, a chorus of voices weaving through the attic. Ellen grabbed Lila's arm, her nails digging in. "We need to go. Now." But before they could move, the mirror flickered again, and this time, the woman from the photograph appeared, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. Smoke curled around her, and she reached out, her lips moving silently. "Run!" The attic door swung open with a crash, the sound shattering the hum. Lila dropped the papers, her breath hitching. Ellen pulled her toward the door, but as they stumbled into the hallway, the house seemed to shift, the walls pulsing with a faint, unnatural light. The crescent mark on Lila's shoulder burned brighter, and she gasped, clutching it. Behind them, the attic door slammed shut again, and the woman's voice echoed, not from the mirror but from everywhere. "They're here." Lila stumbled into the hallway, her mother's grip on her arm bruising but grounding. The crescent mark on her shoulder throbbed, a searing pulse that matched the faint glow flickering along the walls. The house felt alive, its pulse sensing with hers, the air thick with the scent of smoke that shouldn't exist. Ellen's face was a mask of panic, her eyes darting to the attic door, now closed again, as if it had never opened. The woman's voice, "They're here," still echoed in Lila's ears, not from the attic, but from inside her, a whisper that clawed at her mind. "Mom, we can't stay here," Lila said, her voice hoarse. Her journal was still in the attic, along with the bundle of papers and that photograph. The woman who looked like her, holding a child marked like her. The image burned in her mind, sharper than any memory she'd ever had. "We need those letters." Ellen shook her head, pulling Lila toward the stairs. No, we're leaving. Now. Her voice cracked, but there was steel beneath it. The kind of resolve that had carried her through years of protecting Lila from questions neither could answer. Whatever's happening, it's not safe. Lila resisted, planting her feet. We can't just run. The letter, the mark, this house, it's all connected. You saw her, Mom. In the mirror, she was trying to tell us something. Her hand went to her shoulder, the crescent mark still warm, as if it were waking up. And I saw her too. In my head, she was holding me, saying she was sorry. Ellen froze, her eyes searching Lila's face. You're sure it was you? Not someone else? Lila nodded, though doubt gnawed at her. The toddler in her vision had her mark, her eyes. But the memory felt foreign, like a story she'd been told rather than lived. Who's Clara? She asked, the name heavy on her tongue. The letters were addressed to her, and the newspaper said she lived here. Ellen's face paled further, her hand tightening around the envelope in her pocket. I don't know, she admitted, but her voice trembled, as if the name stirred something buried. But we're not staying to find out. Come on. They moved toward the stairs, the hallway stretching longer than it should, the walls pulsing with that eerie light. The air grew colder, the smell of smoke stronger, and Lila's skin prickled with the sense of being watched. She glanced back at the attic door, half expecting it to swing open, but it remained shut, a silent sentinel. The photograph flashed in her mind again, the woman's desperate eyes, the toddler's crescent mark glowing like a brand. As they reached the staircase, the lights flickered back on, casting harsh shadows. Ellen's breath hitched, and Lila followed her gaze to the wall. The faded wallpaper was peeling, revealing scratches beneath. Crescent shapes, dozens of them, etched in patterns that spiraled like a constellation. Lila's stomach dropped. Mom, did you ever see these before? Ellen shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. No, never. She reached out, her fingers hovering over the marks, then pulled back as if burned. This house, it's always had secrets, but this. Lila's mind raced, the letters' words looping. The mark is a beacon. It calls them. Who were they? And why did the house feel like it was waking up, responding to her presence? She touched the crescent on her shoulder again, the heat fading but leaving a faint hum, like a tuning fork struck deep within her. They descended the stairs, each step creaking louder than the last. The living room was dim, the rain still hammering outside. But the air felt different now, charged, expectant. Ellen grabbed her phone from the coffee table, her hands shaking as she dialed David. Pick up, she muttered, but the call went to voicemail. She cursed under her breath, her eyes meeting Lila's. We'll drive to his office. Get your coat. Lila nodded, but her gaze fell on the kitchen counter where the envelope still sat. She crossed to it, her fingers brushing the coffee-stained edge. We need to take this, she said, tucking it into her sweater pocket. And I need my journal. I'm going back up. Lila, no. Ellen's voice was sharp, almost frantic. You're not going back to that attic. I have to, Lila said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. My sketches, those letters, they're part of this. I can feel it. She didn't wait for Ellen's response, turning back to the stairs. Her mother's protests followed, but Lila's resolve was iron. The house was speaking to her, and she couldn't ignore it. The attic door was still closed when she reached it, but the lock was gone, the latch dangling as if it had never been secure. She pushed it open, the hinges silent this time, and stepped inside. The air was colder, the smell of smoke overwhelming. Her journal lay where she'd left it, next to the bundle of papers. She grabbed both, her eyes avoiding the mirror, though she felt its pull, like a tide dragging her under. As she turned to leave, the floorboards creaked behind her. Not her mother's footsteps, too heavy, too deliberate. She spun, her heart in her throat, but the attic was empty. The mirror reflected only her face, pale and wide-eyed, but the crescent mark on her shoulder glowed faintly through her sweater, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. Lila. Ellen's voice came from the hallway, urgent. "Get out of there!" Lila clutched the journal and papers, sprinting for the door. But as she crossed the threshold, the attic window shattered, glass raining down like shards of ice. The wind howled, carrying a whisper that wasn't the storm. "Clara's child." Lila stumbled into the hallway, slamming the door behind her. Ellen was there, her face ashen, her eyes fixed on the attic. "What was that?" she gasped. Lila couldn't answer. The whisper echoed in her mind, and the crescent mark burned, a warning or a call. The house wasn't just haunted, it was alive, and it knew her name. Ellen's hands trembled as she locked the front door behind them, the rain soaking their clothes as they stepped onto the porch. The storm had worsened, the wind howling like a living thing, tearing leaves from the trees and scattering them across Willow Street. Lila clutched her journal and the bundle of papers, her face pale but resolute, the crescent mark on her shoulder hidden beneath her sweater but burning in Ellen's mind. The whisper from the attic, "Clara's child," had followed them, lingering like a shadow they couldn't shake. "We're going to David's office," Ellen said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her chest. She glanced at the car parked in the driveway, its windows fogged with rain. "He'll know what to do." But even as she spoke, doubt gnawed at her. David was logical, grounded, the opposite of the chaos unfolding in their home. Could he make sense of this? A letter from a ghost, a house that whispered, a mark that glowed? Lila nodded, but her eyes were distant, fixed on the house. The Victorian loomed behind them, its stained glass windows glinting like eyes in the storm's gray light. "Mom," she said softly, "it's not going to let us go." Ellen's heart skipped. "What are you talking about? It's just a house." But the words felt hollow, even to her. The crescent marks on the walls, the mirrors' visions, the letters' warnings, they weren't just coincidence. She grabbed Lila's hand, pulling her toward the car. "We're not staying to find out." They ran through the rain, the wind biting at their skin. Ellen fumbled with the car keys, her fingers slick, and unlocked the doors. Lila slid into the passenger seat, her journal and papers clutched to her chest like a lifeline. As Ellen started the engine, the headlights cut through the downpour, illuminating the house. For a moment, she thought she saw a figure in the attic window. A woman, her face pale, her eyes glowing like embers. She blinked, and it was gone. "Mom, drive," Lila urged, her voice tight. She was flipping through the bundle of papers, her fingers trembling as she scanned the faded ink. "These letters, they're not just to Clara. They're about her and me." Ellen gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white, and pulled out of the driveway. The rain blurred the world outside, but the house seemed to follow them, its presence heavy in her mind. "What do they say?" she asked, glancing at Lila. Lila's voice was low, almost lost in the storm's roar. "They talk about a ritual. Something about binding the mark to protect her. Me, I think. The woman, my birth mother, she wrote that she tried to break it, but it didn't work. She says the house is a anchor." She paused, her eyes widening. "It's keeping something here, something that wants me." Ellen's stomach churned. "That's impossible," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. She thought of the attic, the crescent etched into the floor, the way the mirror had shown a woman who wasn't there. What else? Lila flipped to another letter, her breath hitching. She mentions the others, people who came for Clara's daughter who wanted the mark. She says they're not human. Her voice broke, and she looked at Ellen, her eyes wide with fear. "Mom, what if they're the ones she warned about? The ones who are here?" Ellen's hands tightened on the wheel, the car swerving slightly as a gust of wind hit. "We don't know what's real yet," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "It could be delusions or metaphors. We'll figure it out with David." But her mind raced, replaying the attic's whispers, the shattered window, the voice that called Lila Clara's child. They drove in silence for a moment, the rain a relentless drum beat. Lila opened her journal, her fingers tracing the sketch of the cloaked figure with glowing eyes. "I drew this before the letter came," she said, her voice barely audible. "Before any of this, How did I know? Ellen didn't have an answer. She glanced at Lila's shoulder, where the crescent mark was hidden but alive, its heat radiating through the car. We'll find out, she said, but the promise felt fragile, like glass about to shatter. As they approached David's office, the storm seemed to pause, the rain easing to a drizzle. The building was dark, the parking lot empty except for David's car. Ellen's heart sank. He should be here, she muttered, pulling into a spot. She dialed his number again, but it went straight to voicemail. Lila's gaze was fixed on the journal, her fingers trembling as she turned to a new page, a sketch she hadn't shown Ellen before. It was the house again, but this time, figures stood on the lawn, cloaked and faceless, their eyes glowing like the ones in the attic. "Mom," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I drew this last night." Ellen's blood ran cold. She looked out the windshield, half expecting to see those figures in the parking lot. The lot was empty, but the air felt wrong, heavy with the same charge as the house. She reached for Lila's hand, but before she could speak, the car radio crackled to life, unprompted, a low hum filling the air. The hum grew into a voice, faint but clear, the same one from the attic. "Clara's child, they're coming." Lila gasped, dropping the journal. The crescent mark on her shoulder flared, visible through her sweater, and the car's headlights flickered, casting shadows that moved when they shouldn't. Ellen's heart pounded as she grabbed Lila's arm, her voice a desperate whisper. "We need to find David, now." But as they stepped out of the car, the rain began again, harder, and a figure appeared at the edge of the lot, cloaked, its eyes glowing like embers, watching them. The rain stung Ellen's face as she stepped out of the car, her eyes locked on the figure at the edge of the parking lot. It stood motionless, cloaked in shadow, its eyes glowing like twin embers through the downpour. The air was electric, charged with the same hum that had haunted the house, and Ellen's heart thudded so loudly she thought it might burst. Lila stood frozen beside her, her journal clutched to her chest, the crescent mark on her shoulder glowing faintly through her soaked sweater. "Mom," Lila whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "It's like my drawing." Ellen grabbed Lila's arm, pulling her back toward the car. "Get in," she hissed, her voice sharp with panic. But Lila resisted, her gaze fixed on the figure, her body trembling not just from the cold but from something deeper, something that felt like recognition. The radio's voice, "Clara's child," still echoed in Ellen's mind, a warning or a summons she couldn't decipher. "We can't just run," Lila said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "It's here for me. I can feel it." Her hand went to her shoulder where the crescent mark pulsed, its heat radiating through the rain-soaked fabric. "The letters, the mark, the house, it's all connected to this." Ellen's throat tightened. She wanted to drag Lila into the car, drive away, and never look back, but the figure's presence was a weight, pinning them in place. Its eyes didn't blink, didn't waver, and the hum grew louder, vibrating in Ellen's bones. "We need to find David," she said, her voice breaking. "He's in there. He'll know what to do." Lila nodded, but her eyes never left the figure. She took a step forward, and Ellen's grip tightened. "Lila, no." "I'm not going to it," Lila said, her tone sharp. "But we can't pretend it's not there. We need answers." She pulled the bundle of papers from her journal, the letters and clippings now damp but intact. "These mention the others. They're tied to the mark. Maybe David can help us figure out who, or what, they are." Ellen hesitated, her gaze flicking to the office building. Its windows were dark, David's car the only one in the lot. The figure hadn't moved, but its presence felt closer, as if the space between them was shrinking. "Okay," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "But we stay together." They moved toward the building, the rain a relentless curtain, the figure's eyes tracking them like a predator. Ellen's hand shook as she fumbled with the office door, the glass cold against her palm. It was unlocked, swinging open with a creak that echoed the house's groans. Inside, the air was stale, the fluorescent lights flickering as if struggling to stay alive. "David?" Ellen called, her voice echoing in the empty reception area. No answer. The hum followed them, softer now but ever present, weaving through the silence. Lila clutched her journal tighter, her fingers brushing the sketch of the cloaked figure. She flipped to it, her breath catching as she compared it to the thing outside. The eyes, the posture, it was identical. "Mom, look," Lila said, holding up the sketch. "I drew this before we got the letter. How did I know?" Ellen's stomach churned. She didn't have an answer, only a growing dread that Lila was right. The house, the mark, the figure were all part of something larger, something that had been waiting for them. "Let's find David," she said, moving toward his office at the end of the hall. The door was ajar, papers scattered across the desk, a coffee mug overturned. David's chair was empty, his jacket slung over the back as if he'd just stepped out. Ellen's heart sank. "David!" she called again, louder, her voice cracking. Lila stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room. "He was here," she said, pointing to a notepad on the desk. It was covered in David's neat handwriting, dates, names, addresses. At the top, circled in red, was Clara Evans, Willow Street, 1978. Below it a single word, fire. Ellen's breath caught. "He was researching the house," she whispered. "Why didn't he tell me?" Lila picked up the notepad, her fingers trembling. "He found something," she said, flipping through the pages. "Look, articles about the fire, missing persons reports. Clara and her daughter disappeared after it. No bodies were found." Her voice shook as she read on. "There's a note here, crescent mark linked to local legend. Cult activity suspected." Ellen's knees buckled and she gripped the desk for support. A cult? The word felt foreign, absurd, but the figure outside, the whispers, the glowing mark, they weren't normal. "What does this have to do with you?" Lila didn't answer. She was staring at the window behind the desk, where rain streaked the glass. For a moment, Ellen thought she saw the figure reflected there, its eyes burning through the storm. Lila's mark flared brighter, and she gasped, clutching her shoulder. "It's calling me," she whispered. "The mark, it's like it's waking something up." Before Ellen could respond, the lights went out, plunging the office into darkness. The hum surged, a chorus of voices now, chanting words Ellen couldn't understand. Lila's mark glowed through her sweater, casting a faint light, and the air grew heavy, thick with the smell of smoke. "David!" Ellen shouted, her voice desperate. A sound came from the back of the building, a low thud, like footsteps. She grabbed Lila's hand, pulling her toward the sound. "He's here. He has to be." But as they moved through the dark hallway, the chanting grew louder, and the figure's eyes appeared in every window they passed, watching, waiting. Lila's mark burned brighter, and a voice, not the woman's, but something deeper, colder, whispered through the hum, "She belongs to us." Lila's pulse roared in her ears, the crescent mark on her shoulder searing like a brand. The voice, "She belongs to us," cut through the hum, cold and sharp, as if it had been carved into the air itself. The office hallway stretched endlessly before her, the flickering emergency lights casting jagged shadows that seemed to move on their own. Ellen's hand was a lifeline, gripping hers tightly. But Lila felt untethered, as if the mark were pulling her towards something she couldn't see. "Mom, we need to find him," Lila said, her voice trembling but resolute. The notepad in her other hand felt heavy, David's notes about Clara, the fire, and the crescent mark anchoring her to the mystery. The figure's eyes burned in her mind, identical to her sketches, to the visions that had haunted her for months. She couldn't shake the feeling that she'd been here before, in this moment, in this darkness. Ellen nodded, her face pale but determined. "He's here somewhere," she said, her voice strained. She pulled Lila toward the back of the building, where the thudding sound had come from, a storage room David used for old files. The hum grew louder with every step, the chanting weaving through it, a language Lila didn't know but felt in her bones, like a song she'd forgotten. The storage room door was cracked open, a faint glow spilling out. Not the harsh flicker of fluorescence, but something softer, colder, like moonlight. Lila's mark pulsed in rhythm with it, and she stifled a gasp, her free hand clutching her shoulder. Ellen pushed the door open, revealing shelves of boxes, their edges softened by dust, and a figure slumped in the corner. "David?" Ellen's voice broke as she rushed forward, dropping Lila's hand. David was on the floor, his back against the wall, his eyes half open but unfocused. Papers were scattered around him, some crumpled, others marked with the same crescent symbol Lila had seen in the attic. His hands were stained with ink, as if he'd been writing frantically before he collapsed. "Dad." Lila knelt beside him, her journal and notepad falling to the floor. She shook his shoulder, his head lolling to the side. He was breathing, shallow but steady, but his skin was cold, too cold. "Dad, wake up." Ellen's hands fluttered over him, checking his pulse, his face. "David, please," she whispered, tears streaking her cheeks. She looked at Lila, her eyes wide with fear. What happened to him? Lila's gaze fell on the papers around David. One caught her eye, a sketch, not hers, but in his hand. It showed the house on Willow Street, flames licking its walls, and a figure with glowing eyes standing on the lawn. Below it in David's neat script, "They came for her. They'll come again." Her stomach twisted. "He knew," she said, her voice barely audible. "He was trying to warn us." Ellen grabbed the sketch, her hands shaking. "Warn us about what? A cult? The fire?" Her voice rose, frantic. "What does this have to do with you?" Lila didn't answer. She couldn't. The chanting grew louder, the words clearer now, though still unintelligible. Her mark burned, and a vision flashed through her mind. Smoke, a woman's hands clutching her, a fire roaring in the distance. The woman's voice, desperate. "They can't have you." Lila gasped, her knees buckling, and Ellen caught her, her arms strong despite her fear. "Lila, what's happening?" Ellen's voice was a lifeline, pulling her back. "It's the mark," Lila said, her voice shaking. "It's showing me things. Memories, maybe. I don't know." She looked at David, still unresponsive, and her heart clenched. "We need to get him out of here." Ellen nodded, looping David's arm over her shoulder. "Help me," she said, and together they lifted him, his weight heavy between them. The chanting followed, echoing in the walls, the floor, the air. The glow from Lila's mark illuminated their path, casting crescent-shaped shadows that danced like ghosts. As they staggered toward the exit, the windows rattled, the rain pounding harder. The figure's eyes appeared again, not just in one window but in every one, a dozen glowing pairs watching them. Lila's breath hitched, her mark burning so fiercely she thought it might consume her. The chanting shifted, a single voice rising above the rest. "Clara's child, the beacon calls." They reached the reception area, the glass door just ahead, but the air grew heavy, the hum so loud it drowned out the storm. Lila's vision blurred. Another memory, or vision, of her taking her. The woman from the photograph, her birth mother, standing in the attic, carving the crescent into the floor. She was crying, her hands bloodied, whispering, "I bind you, I hide you, but it won't hold forever." "Lila." Ellen's shout snapped her back. The door was stuck, the handle cold as ice under her hand. David stirred, his eyes fluttering open, but his voice was weak, slurred. "The mark? It's a key." Before Lila could ask what he meant, the glass door shattered inward, shards flying like shrapnel. The figure stood just outside, closer now, its cloak billowing in the wind, its eyes locked on Lila. The chanting stopped, and a silence fell, heavy and final, broken only by the sound of her own heartbeat and the whisper of her name. Lila's breath caught as the glass door's shards glittered on the floor, the figure's glowing eyes piercing through the rain-soaked darkness. The air was thick with the smell of smoke, though no fire burned, and the crescent mark on her shoulder pulsed with a heat that felt alive, as if it were calling to the figure outside. Ellen clung to David, his weight sagging between them, his muttered words. "The mark, it's a key," echoing in Lila's mind. The office felt like a trap, the walls closing in, the hum returning as a low, relentless chant that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Mom, we can't stay here," Lila said, her voice trembling but resolute. Her journal and the bundle of papers were tucked under her arm, their weight a reminder of the truths they hadn't yet unraveled. The figure hadn't moved, but its presence was a pressure, a pull that tugged at the mark on her shoulder, as if it knew her, wanted her. Ellen's face was pale, her eyes darting between David and the figure. "We need to get to the car," she said, her voice strained but firm. She adjusted David's arm over her shoulder, her strength defying her fear. "Leila, help me." Lila nodded, looping David's other arm around her. His head lolled, his eyes half open, but he managed a weak whisper. "Don't let it take her." The words sent a chill through Lila, sharper than the rain. She glanced at the figure, its eyes unblinking, and felt a tug deep within her, as if the mark were a compass needle pointing toward it. They stumbled toward the shattered door, glass crunching under their feet. The rain lashed at them as they stepped outside, the figure still standing at the edge of the lot, its cloak untouched by the wind. Lila's mark burned brighter, casting a faint glow through her sweater, and the chanting grew louder, a chorus of voices weaving her name. "Clara's child, the beacon calls." "Keep moving," Ellen urged, her voice barely audible over the storm. They dragged David toward the car, his feet scraping the pavement. Lila's mind raced, the letters' words looping. "The mark is a beacon. It calls them." She thought of the woman in her visions, her birth mother, carving the crescent into the attic floor, her hands bloodied, her voice desperate. Was this what she'd tried to protect her from? These others who were inhuman? They reached the car, Ellen fumbling with the keys as she propped David against the door. Lila glanced back, her heart lurching. The figure was closer now, halfway across the lot, its movements silent, unnatural, as if it glided rather than walked. Its eyes locked on hers, and a vision flashed. Smoke, fire, a woman screaming her name. Not Lila, but something else, something older. Elara. "Leila." Ellen's shout snapped her back. The car door was open. David slumped in the back seat, his breathing shallow but steady. Ellen grabbed Lila's arm, pulling her into the passenger seat. "Get in now." Lila obeyed, her journal and papers clutched to her chest. The mark's heat was unbearable now, a fire beneath her skin, and the chanting filled her head, drowning out the storm. Ellen slammed the driver's door and started the engine, the headlights cutting through the rain. The figure was gone, but Lila felt its eyes as if they burrowed into her. "Where are we going?" Lila asked, her voice shaking. She flipped through the papers, her eyes scanning a letter she hadn't read before. The handwriting was frantic, the ink smudged. Clara tried to hide her, but the mark can't be hidden. It's a key to them, a door they'll open. Elara must be protected, or they'll take her. Lila's breath hitched. "Elara?" she whispered. "Is that me?" Ellen's hands tightened on the wheel, her knuckles white. "I don't know," she said, her voice breaking. "But we're not going back to that house, not until we understand this." She glanced at David in the rearview mirror, his face pale, his lips moving silently as if still muttering about the mark. Lila's fingers brushed the crescent sketch in her journal, the one she'd drawn months ago, before the letter, before the visions. The figure's eyes, the house's glow, the crescent. They were all there, as if she'd known this was coming. "Dad knew something," she said, her voice low. "He was researching Clara, the fire. He found out about the mark." Ellen nodded, tears glinting in her eyes. "He was trying to protect you," she said. "Like I am." But her voice wavered as if she doubted her ability to keep that promise. The car sped through the rain, the town blurring past, but the hum followed, a shadow in the air. Lila's mark pulsed, and another vision came. Her birth mother, standing in a circle of cloaked figures, their eyes glowing, her hands raised as if in surrender. She was chanting, not in fear but in defiance, her voice strong. "You can't have her." The vision faded, And Lila gasped, her hand clutching her shoulder. The car swerved as Ellen glanced at her, panic in her eyes. "Lila, what's wrong?" "It's her," Lila said, her voice trembling. "My birth mother. She was fighting them. For me." She looked at Ellen, her heart pounding. "We have to go back to the house. The answers are there." Ellen shook her head, her voice sharp. "No, it's not safe." But before Lila could argue, the radio crackled to life again, the same cold voice cutting through. "Elara, the beacon is lit." The headlights flickered, and the car stalled, jerking to a stop in the middle of the road. The rain roared, and through the windshield Lila saw them, dozens of cloaked figures, their eyes glowing, forming a circle around the car.